I run a 144-year-old institution, and so we're steeped in the old power world, and the thinking really grew out of the day job of actually how do you run an institution like that and what's changing. And I think the one thing we realised at the 92nd Street Y was to engage in new ways, we had to actually reimagine our model, not just our tools. That was the big breakthrough, I think. And so I started writing in Harvard Business Review with my colleague Jeremy Hymans. We wrote a piece on new power, and what was so interesting about that piece was that it went kind of viral in a way that we didn't expect. And lots of people started to say, well, here's how new power works in the medical industry, and here's how new power works in the intelligence community, and here's how new power works for non-profits. And people started to develop a thesis, and I think that's what kind of supercharged our work around this, to say, look, if we can create a framework like new power and old power, and some frameworks which kind of click into some of these concepts, other people will then take this idea and make it much more interesting, and so it's proved. Well, I think one of the biggest opportunities and challenges around new power is the communications. Well, you think back even relatively recently, the communicational arsenal was actually quite narrow, right? You had your press releases, you had your TV ads, you had your magazine articles, you had your radio spots, like all these things that you would produce and essentially download onto the world. That was how communications typically worked. And the really interesting shift now, of course, is the dynamic isn't download but upload. How do you get people to engage around your brand in interesting and dynamic ways? So I think the interesting thing for the communications world is we're entering this period where we're even thinking differently about how we measure the industry. Like for a long time, communications was the key measurement in communications was impressions, right? How many eyeballs could you get in front of with your message? That's changed. The key message now is impressions, is expressions. How do you get people to express things around your brand? How do you get them to engage and do interesting things around you? So you look at something like the Nike Kaepernick commercial recently. Now, whatever your view is on that, what was so interesting about that is actually they were really trying to drive expressionism. People showing solidarity with the company, sharing their views, buying their sneakers, talking to their friends. They did a really interesting job of actually encouraging upload, not download. And so as that shift starts to shift communications, it's the perfect time to be studying what communications is and how you can get the best out of kind of both the old power communication strategy and the new power. So I think for a long time you're right that the mantra is message control. You keep people relentlessly on message, get your soundbite, and everyone repeats it over and over and over again. Clearly, some of the most effective communicators in the world right now are letting the message morph and change and develop. So you look at Donald Trump, whatever your view happens to be, and he offers a very good example of somebody who lets his message morph. He's designing essentially these memes which go out into the world and they get grabbed and become more urgent and more extreme and more localized. And so his message isn't staying the same, and actually his campaigns and his politics are stronger because of that. So I think that is a big lesson now, but that doesn't mean that we're abandoning control for chaos. That isn't the trade right now. The way to think about this, I think, is structuring for control slightly differently. So you're releasing control, but if you get it right, you're also encouraging direction. So this isn't anarchy, right? But it is a much more released, kind of focused, intense mobilization of people around the message. So I think the skills you need to lead in the new power world are actually often very different than the skills in the old power world. So if you think about new power leadership, there's three skills we see which are really emerging. The first is this kind of signaling. How do you send signals to your crowd that you want them to engage, you want them to be powerful, you want to kind of direct them. Second, structure. How do you actually change your organization so people can be more participatory, so you can be more engaged? And then finally, shape. How do you shape a message? How do you get the norms of a community, often much bigger than your payroll? How do you get them pushing in the right direction? And you look at examples, something like Black Lives Matter. The founders of Black Lives Matter just showed an extraordinary example of sending this amazing signal about how they want other people to be more powerful. They talk about this leader-full movement. They have this amazing structure which they've created, chapters around the country and also this kind of light infrastructure around the world to allow them to grow in the way that they have. And then of course the shaping, which is what's been so interesting, is the co-founders themselves have this capacity to kind of direct and channel the overarching message of the movement. That's the kind of leadership which is very different than the kind of 20th century archetype of the kind of superhero man who helps everyone lead the way. Hi, I'm Henry Timms. I'm the author of New Power. I'm here at the University of Washington Communication Leadership event, doing two things, learning from some of the students and trying to share some of my ideas.